All right, thank you for joining this video. I've actually written an article related to this, and hopefully you're watching this video because you read through the article. But sometimes my writing can get a little dry, so hopefully you'll find the video more entertaining. To begin, I would say check out the Github Repository, which contains the examples for you to follow. One thing to keep in mind is that this was set up using the Sitecore 9.3 images. So if you've built newer versions, maybe you're in a future version of Sitecore or an older version of Sitecore and you're trying to get this working, the references in the compose file, or rather the environment file would reference 9.3. And so just make the adjustments as I point out in the article. So from here, if you were to clone it, then you'll get all of the necessary files to get going. What we can see in the root of the repository is going to be basically the same files that you get with the official Sitecore Docker images repository. What I've done is I've taken the XM configuration, which has Solr, SQL, and the content management, and put that into my repository. And then all of the references in the compose file assume that those images exist on your machine. If we're in the future and Sitecore is hosting those, then hopefully I can update the example to just use their hosted versions. If that never happens, well, do it yourself. So let's have a look at the files that are in the repository. First and foremost, the Docker compose file is going to be almost exactly the same as what came in the Sitecore example. What I've done is I've added a new service called Monitor, which is built, it's based on an image that is hosted by a member of the community out on Docker Hub. And what he did was he found an example that was built by someone in a completely different community, probably the Docker community, and made it much better. The Monitor service performs different actions that the original didn't do. And probably the most important to me is that it updates the host file with all of the services and uses the aliases that are configured. And I'll show where that's set up down below. So once again, make sure that you're using this because it's way more convenient than trying to open a host file and change the host header settings. If we scroll a little bit further down, we'll see that we've got the content management service. Couple of adjustments that I've made here is the entry point. Instead of using the development PowerShell script, I have the startup PowerShell script. The startup PowerShell script will run the development PowerShell script. Man, it's a hard word to say really fast. But what was important to me is that I kept it simple in terms of the compose file, and then all of the different custom things I want to do, I just put in the startup script. And for this video, obviously why we're here together today is to set up what's necessary to have a secure website running in Docker. Another thing I did was I added this alias to the CM, which would allow for the Monitor app to pick that up and to put that into the host file. There's probably some other interesting reasons that you'd have this alias, but what was important to me is that the Monitor added something more than CM, because I don't want CM to be the host name in the URL. Also, I've added a environment variable with the same URL, and what this is going to do is when one of the PowerShell scripts runs, it's going to pick up these values and use that to ensure the host bindings are set up properly. Also, we've got this host file on my host machine, and there were no entries below the end of section that was added by Docker. So what I expect to happen in our demo is that when this runs, and it runs properly, then you'll see a couple more rows added. We'll jump to the create certificate script. So this is something you'd want to run in an elevated PowerShell console. The default values for the DNS name are going to be star.dev.local, and the certificate password, because I didn't care to do anything complicated, I just use B, but you can override these values as you see fit. Another thing that I've done in here is the certificate is for 10 years. I assume in the next 10 years, if you're still working on Sitecore, you're probably not using the script. And if you are, that's fantastic. Delete the certificate from your local host and rerun it. Also, we've got an area where the certificate is generated and the PFX file, which is really the version that you care about that is transferable to other machines. This one is going to be reserved on the machine after the script runs. The CER file will get deleted, and then a third file, the password text file, will be generated to contain a clear text version of the password. I got real lazy. There's probably a better way to do this, but I found some issues with getting the password to go from my local machine, I think like as a host, environment variable to the Docker machine. So I just went ahead and dumped it into a text file. If you come up with a more reliable way to do that, then just share it with me and I'll incorporate that into the demo if I care to. Also, the startup PowerShell script. This is the one that the magic happens. It runs when the container starts up. That's why it has an entry point with this script file. And at the very end, it's going to call the development PS1. Don't forget, if you are using a compose file that you already had set up and there are some watch directory function calls to it, such as to include or exclude specific directories, maybe you've overridden the default values, be sure to just put that here so that it'll still happen the way you expect. It just is in this file instead of the compose file. So what we'll do now is run Docker compose up. And what I hope happens, fingers crossed, is all the services start up and the CM depends on SQL and Solr, so those end up running first. Monitor, nothing really depends on Monitor. It does its magic once it starts up and running. And you'll see in some of these log messages something that may seem familiar, like adding a new HTTP binding, add an HTTPS version of that. The watch directory, see it still runs. Another thing is that when the monitor, so the host writer, when that thing starts up, you'll get an entry for that, knowing that everything should be working as expected. And if we jump to the host file, you'll see that there are now 4 entries added. And my alias is in this file. So if I didn't do the network alias, then that wouldn't exist, and then why would we be having this video right now? And so what I can do next is, hopefully, fingers crossed, I can go to this URL and my machine now detects that, hey, there's a certificate on the machine and there's a certificate on the other machine that's running, and we trust each other, so we'll get a secure website running. If you have any problems with this working, like maybe you've done it and the certificate didn't work, or you had a certificate already using the same wildcard, you may consider just deleting it from your host machine and making sure that the files generated when you run the container are all cleared out using the cleanup PS1, clean data PS1. Just do all that and sort of start over. But I've not had any issues with this working. And just to make sure that this is as I expect, we can see that the certificate is trusted and it's using the wildcard for 10 years. Yeah, this is great. Hopefully you found this entertaining and informative. Reach out to me on the Sitecore chat and let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.